The air tasted like blood and pennies. That was my first clear thought, standing in the snow behind the barn with my throat burning from the cold and my gloves half buttoned because I'd come outside too fast to finish dressing. The wind had dropped off an hour earlier, but the yard still hissed with blown powder skimming over the drifts. Somewhere above me, the barn timbers gave off that low wooden creak they made in deep winter, slow and irregular. The sound of something old adjusting its weight. At first I thought the figure coming toward me was Wade. It had a man's shape, heavy coat, hat pulled low, one shoulder dipped lower than the other. But the walk was wrong. The left leg dragged behind the right at an angle no knee should have taken, the boot carving a crooked trough through the snow. Not limping, being pulled almost, hauled forward by the rest of the body. Then it said my name, not from far away, not shouted, close enough that the voice felt breathed into my ear. Clayton. I hadn't heard that voice in years, not outside dreams I never talked about, and even then never that clear, dry. Ragged, with that little hitch between syllables, like pain caught in the middle of speech. The thing kept coming. I looked down without meaning to, just for 1 second, and the snow behind it turned my stomach cold in a way the weather couldn't. The footprints trailing from the dark side of the barn were mine. My exact length, my exact depth. Heel on the right, slight outward turn on the left where my ankle had healed wrong after college, perfectly aligned. Then the figure stopped 10 feet from me, lifted its face just enough for me to see the swollen tilt of the jaw and the dark wetness at one side of the mouth, and said very softly, "You signed off on this." I didn't know how something on my uncle's ranch in Carbon County, Wyoming, knew about a report filed years earlier in another state. 3 days before that, I thought I was coming home to settle an estate. My Uncle Vernon had never married, never had kids, and after my father died, he became the kind of relative who existed in fragments. Christmas cards with no return note. A voicemail every few months that was mostly weather and feed prices. The occasional photograph of calves in mud or snow sent without commentary, as if that said enough. When the lawyer called and told me Vernon was gone and the ranch had been left to me, I took it as an inconvenience first and a duty second. I had a career in Cheyenne, a decent one, built on making sure large properties stayed profitable and safe. Ranches, feedlots, storage yards, private industrial sites. I evaluated structures, maintenance schedules, load risks, employee exposure. I was good at giving disorder a spreadsheet and a deadline. That's how I approached the inheritance. Not sentiment, not grief. A property transfer with emotional residue. The drive up from town had put me in the wrong kind of mood for memory. The road climbed into country I knew before I recognized it. Fence lines cutting across white ground. Stands of bare cottonwood near frozen creek beds, windbreaks leaning like tired men. I remembered summers there and flashes that didn't fit together right, the smell of hot dust and cattle salt, my uncle laughing once and only once, a worker telling me not to lean on a fence because the post had gone soft at the base. I remembered ignoring him because I was 14 and because boys that age think warnings are a form of insult. At the time, the fence hadn't fallen. That seemed important to me then. When Halverson Ranch finally came into view, I saw right away that something about it was off, though I couldn't have said what in the first second. The house sat where it always had, low and broad, tucked against the rise. The barn stood west of it, the same old red gone black at the seams from weather. The corrals spread out like a hand opening toward the north pasture. Familiar, almost enough to loosen something in me. Then the professional part of my mind took over. The gates were hung at odd intervals, not damaged, not sagging, intentionally placed wrong. A run of fence near the equipment shed jogged 3 feet off true and then corrected. Another line was reinforced on the inside instead of the outside, which made no structural sense if you were thinking about livestock pressure. I slowed the truck and leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting through the windshield as if perspective might fix it. It didn't. The whole place looked like it had been maintained by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing and chose to do it crooked anyway. Wade Colburn Sutter was waiting by the main gate in a shearling coat and a brown hat gone white around the brim with frost. He was older than I remembered from the few times I'd met him as a kid, but not old. Late 50s maybe, heavy hands, flat eyes, a face weather had worked over for years without ever softening. He watched me get out of the truck like he was taking stock of tools laid out on a bench. "Clayton," he said. "Wade." We shook hands. His palm was rough and dry and cold enough to hurt. He didn't offer condolences. I didn't ask how Vernon died. There was a stiffness to him that told me the first wrong word would turn the whole meeting difficult. "Road treat you all right?" I asked. "Good enough." He looked past me to the sun, then toward the barn. "You'll want to get your things in before dark." I almost smiled. It was barely past 3, winter light still hard and bright on the drifts. "I know how Wyoming works." "I know you do," he said. Still. That was the first note of urgency, small enough to ignore. So I did. He helped me unload without speaking much. I noticed he never turned his back fully to the barn, not once. Even when he hauled my duffel from the truck bed, even when he shouldered the box of paperwork from the lawyer's office. His head kept angling just slightly, like a man listening for a noise under conversation. Inside, the house felt overwarm and stale, radiator heat over old wood and dust. Under that was the smell I remembered from childhood, old hay carried in on boots, and something else underneath it this time, damp and mineral like wet stone pulled up from a cellar. "Pipe issue?" I asked. Wade glanced toward the back hall. "No." I set my gloves on the kitchen table. "I've got a surveyor coming later this week. I want to walk the lines tomorrow, get a sense of deferred maintenance, see what we're really dealing with." "North lines are fine." I wasn't asking which ones were fine. That got his eyes on me properly, not angry, measuring. "I'd stay out of the south field till you've settled in," he said. "Why?" "Cattle don't like it this time of year." I gave a short laugh before I could stop myself. Cattle don't like a lot of things. He didn't laugh with me. That was when I should have felt it. Not fear exactly. Just the first hairline crack in the assumption that I knew what kind of job I'd arrived for. But I was tired from the drive and too familiar with rural superstition to be impressed by it. Every property has rules people defend because their fathers defended them. Don't whistle in the calving shed. Don't leave halters on the North Hook. Don't count the herd out loud after sunset. Usually those rules are just habits wearing ghost masks. I figured Wade was a practical man wrapped around a set of family eccentricities. I was wrong about the order of those things. Before he left that evening, he stood in the mudroom with his hat in both hands and said, "Your uncle kept papers in the office desk. Anything you need to know's there. Financials?" A pause. "Some." He put his hat back on. Then he added, almost like an afterthought, "Barn doors get locked before sunset. Even if you're stepping out for a minute, make sure of it." I said, "You worried about theft out here?" He looked toward the back window where the barn roof showed above the drifted yard, dark against the snow. "No," he said. "I'm worried about habit." Looking back, that was the last normal advice anyone gave me on that ranch. The office still smelled like Vernon. Pipe tobacco he never admitted to smoking in the house, saddle soap, printer ink, old paper. The desk sat under the window facing west, scarred and broad enough to work cattle receipts on one side and estate documents on the other. I spent the first hour doing exactly what I'd planned, sorting deed paperwork from feed invoices, insurance records from veterinary bills, making stacks neat enough for morning review. It steadied me. Order always had. Outside, the light thinned and turned blue at the edges. Every now and then, the barn sounded off with one of those slow, cold creaks. Each one came at a different interval, or seemed to. I remember noticing it without really listening, the way you ignore a ticking vent or a house settling around you. At the bottom of the second ledger drawer, under an outdated vaccination log and 3 years of breeding notes, I found the folded paper. No envelope, no note attached. Just one page folded into quarters and tucked inside the back cover of a livestock ledger, like somebody had hidden it quickly and expected it to be found eventually. I opened it standing there. The handwriting was Vernon's. Blocky. Pressed hard enough to dent the page under it. Do not follow any footsteps in the snow that match your stride exactly. If the cattle refuse to enter the south field, do not force them. Lock the barn doors before sunset, even if something is still inside. If you hear someone call your name from behind you, finish what you are doing before you turn. If Wade tells you to leave, you are already too late. I read it twice. Then I actually snorted. I was tired enough that the sound startled me. It echoed strangely in the small office, too loud against the radiator hiss. I turned the page over, expecting more. Some explanation or joke, or at least the context that would make the list something other than what it looked like. There was nothing on the back. So I did what competent people do when confronted with nonsense in a room full of real tasks. I classified it as nonsense and kept working. Vernon had gotten stranger in the last few years. That was the family line anyway. More private, more set in his routines. It wasn't hard to imagine him inventing a little mythology around the place, especially living alone as much as he had. And if Wade had helped feed that mythology, that wasn't exactly rare either. Long-term foremen can become priests of a property's bad habits. I set the paper aside on the desk and went on with the ledgers. The next morning I found it back inside the livestock book. I told myself I'd absent-mindedly tucked it there the night before. The metallic air hit the back of my throat when I stepped onto the porch, cold enough to make each breath feel sharpened. The yard was bright, snow glare everywhere. The barn roof flashed white at the ridge, and the fences shone blue where shadow cut across them. Everything had the clean, brutal look winter gives a ranch, as if age and dirt have been temporarily erased. That lasted until I walked the west line. One of the fence posts near the equipment shed had split at the base. I knelt to inspect it and felt irritation before anything else. I'd noticed a slight lean there the day before and put a brace on it before dark. Just temporary reinforcement until I could replace it properly. The brace was still attached. The nails were still in. But the post itself had sheared through anyway, as if the wood had decided to fail around the repair rather than because of it. I ran a gloved thumb over the break. Fresh, clean, no weathering. Huh, I said to nobody. The ground around it held no track but mine. I fetched a new post, reset the line, tamped frozen dirt until my shoulders ached, and went in for coffee with the smug little satisfaction that comes from fixing something before breakfast. Wade was already in the kitchen, cup in hand, steam rolling up past the brim of his hat. I hadn't heard his truck. Fence by the shed went bad, I said. I replaced it. He nodded once. Then he asked, "Did you read them yet?" "The note?" I poured coffee. "Yeah." He watched me over the rim of his cup. I said, "Your idea of hazing the new owner?" Nothing. Not confusion, not offense, no reaction at all. His face stayed exactly the same, like I'd answered a different question from the one he'd asked. After a few seconds, he set the cup down and said, "North herds do feed." That was it. He turned and walked out before I could decide whether to be annoyed or amused. Maribel June Carrington came by just before noon in an aging green pickup with a dog-riding shotgun and 2 sacks of mineral block in the bed. I remembered her as a name from childhood, the nearest neighbor on the East Road, though neighbor out there meant nearly 2 miles. She was probably in her 60s, silver hair braided tight under a knit cap, eyes so pale they looked reflective in the winter light. "Thought Vernon might have forgotten he'd died and left these unpaid," she said when I met her at the gate. She said it dry enough that I laughed. Unlike Wade, she seemed willing to behave as if the world still made sense. We stood by the truck while her dog whined at the smell of cattle. She told me where she'd been keeping an eye on the water line since Vernon got sick. Told me which hay supplier had gone unreliable. Told me the county man had asked twice whether I meant to sell. All normal things. Ordinary ranch talk. I relaxed enough to ask what everybody in town thought of Vernon leaving the place to me after all these years. She rubbed a thumb along the steering wheel. Most people figured he wanted family blood on the deed. I said, if there was romance in that decision, the lawyer failed to mention it. Her mouth twitched but never became a smile. Did Wade give you the paper? I leaned against the gatepost. So everybody knows about the paper. Everybody who matters. I should have pressed her then. Instead I said, my uncle also used to tell me not to whistle in the tack room. Doesn't make the tack room haunted. Her eyes moved to the barn and stayed there one beat too long. No, she said, just full of tack. That was all she'd give me. By late afternoon I had inventory lists started, 2 maintenance priorities set, and enough of a picture to feel justified in my original assessment. The ranch was profitable but inefficient. Vernon had allowed a layer of ritual to settle over practical operations. Wade had adapted to it. Maribel had grown polite around it. If I intended to keep the place, I needed to separate sentiment from management. It felt good to think that way. Clean. Adult. Professional. When I checked the west line again before dusk, the replacement fence post was broken. Same place. Same clean split. No tracks around it but mine. I stood there in the frozen silence with the smell of old hay riding the wind from the barn and the cold burning metal down my throat. And for the first time I felt something small and unpleasant move under my confidence. Not fear, just resistance. Like the ranch had heard my plan for it and disagreed. I still didn't read the rules again. That was the shape of my mistake from the beginning. Not one bad choice, a series of delays dressed up as judgment. I didn't ignore the warning because I was reckless. I ignored it because I'd spent years being rewarded for deciding which warnings mattered and which ones didn't. Once you build a life on that distinction, you stop noticing when it becomes arrogance. The snow started in the night, light and dry, enough to skin the yard and sharpen every track by dawn. I stepped off the porch with a mug of coffee in one hand and stopped so suddenly some of it sloshed over my glove. There were footprints in the yard already. Mine. That was the first thought, automatic and harmless. The tread pattern matched my boots, the heel wear on the right side, the shallow toe bite from where the left sole had started peeling last month. They led from the porch steps toward the barn in an ordinary straight line. Then I looked down. My own fresh prints ended at the bottom step. The others were older by maybe an hour, just enough frost gathered in the edges to set them apart. They'd been made before I came out. I set the mug on the railing and followed them with my eyes. Across the open yard, past the corner of the barn, toward the gap in the corrals where the ground dipped on its way to the south field. I told myself several things in quick succession. That Wade had borrowed my boots once. That I'd come out half asleep in the night and forgotten. That the snow had filled the shape in a way that made similarity look exact. Reason will line up explanations for you like tools on a bench if you've trained it to. Then I took a step into one of the prints. Perfect fit. My stomach tightened, though not enough to stop me. I looked over my shoulder toward the house, almost expecting Wade to be watching from a window with that unreadable expression of his, but the glass only gave me back my own outline. I thought of the paper in the ledger. Do not follow any footsteps in the snow that match your stride exactly. I said out loud to the empty yard, Jesus, not in fear, in irritation, the way you'd speak when a prank crossed from annoying into elaborate. Then I followed them. Only for a little way, I told myself. Only because the simplest explanation was still a human one, and if Wade had decided to stage something strange to protect Vernon's mythology, I wanted it over with. The prints led along the barn wall where the wood released that low, cold creak in uneven groans. I smelled damp mineral under the hay scent, stronger there, as if something wet had been sealed in the boards. At the back corner, the track bent toward the corrals. The stride length never varied. My stride. My exact rhythm. I knew that rhythm better than most people knew their own signatures. Years of sight inspections had made me weirdly attentive to the body, how people shifted weight on unstable catwalks, how they compensated on stairs, how fatigue shortened a step near the end of a long shift. Risk announces itself in movement before anything actually fails. It was part of what made me good at my job. Those prints moved like me on a day when I was trying not to think. That's what bothered me most. They went through the gap in the fence and across the drifted path toward the south field gate. I stopped there, hands gone cold around nothing because I'd forgotten my coffee on the porch. Beyond the gate, the field lay smooth and white, ringed by posts Vernon had reinforced with diagonal braces set at those same wrong angles I'd noticed on arrival. There was no wind, no bird sound, no engine noise from Wade's truck. Just the faint complaint of wood somewhere behind me and my own breath catching metal at the back of my tongue. The tracks continued through the gate. I didn't. Curiosity has a point where it becomes participation. Even then, before I had any framework for what was happening, I felt the line. So I stood there staring at my own footprints heading into a field I hadn't entered, and after a while I said, "Cute." My voice came back flat off the snow. Nothing moved. Eventually, I turned around and headed back to the house. Halfway there, I looked over my shoulder to make sure the tracks still existed, and I had the distinctly embarrassing thought that maybe they'd vanished, and I'd have to explain to myself why I'd been rattled by a trick of the light. They were still there. Later, when I told Wade what I'd found, he went so still I thought for a second he hadn't heard me. We were in the machine shed checking an old feed auger, the smell of diesel and cold grease thick in the air. "You followed them?" he asked. "To the south gate." His jaw tightened once. "How far past?" I didn't go through. He looked at the auger, not at me. "You ought to have read the whole page." I did read it. "No," he said quietly. "You looked at it." That landed harder than it should have, maybe because there was no mockery in it. Only exhaustion. I started to answer and found myself irritated again, which was easier to manage than uncertainty. "Nothing happened," I said. Wade ran a hand over the rusted auger housing. "Not right away." I almost asked what that meant. Instead, I let professional annoyance keep me moving. I spent the afternoon tagging repairs in the calving lot, making notes on the bent hinge at the fuel shed, estimating the cost of replacing a stretch of old cedar post with steel. Ordinary work. Grounding work. By evening, I'd nearly convinced myself Wade's reaction had been more about maintaining order than fear. People hate it when you disrupt the systems they've built, no matter how irrational those systems are. That night, I slept badly in the room I'd used as a boy. The mattress had the same dip in the middle. The radiator still knocked twice before steadying. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the barn groaning in the cold. Groaning, not creaking. A slow wooden complaint, then silence. Then the same sound again. Exact interval. I lay there counting without meaning to. 1 breath, 2, 3, 4. Then the beam sound again. I listened through 3 repetitions before I understood why it made the skin on my arms tighten. It wasn't random settling. It was rhythm, like breathing through old wood. I got up and went to the window. Frost had crusted the lower pane. I scraped a circle clear with my thumb and looked out over the yard. Moonlight had silvered the drifts. The barn stood black and still, doors shut, roofline sharp against the pale sky. Then something bumped hard from inside. Just once, not loud, not enough to call panic. An animal shifting, I told myself. A cow throwing weight against a partition. Horses do worse than that in winter. Anything living in a confined space makes noise. I got back in bed. I know now that the worst thing about the ranch wasn't how quickly it frightened me. It was how long it kept letting me feel reasonable. The south field came up the next day because I made it come up. There was no shortage of workable pasture on the north side, but the south field was broad, fenced, and underused to the point of waste. From a management standpoint, it irritated me just looking at it. Good acreage sitting idle because the people around it had agreed to be afraid of something they refused to define. The herd felt my intention before Wade did. Cattle are practical creatures. They don't perform. They don't spook for symbolism. When a whole group balks, there's usually a cause, wind shear, bad footing, scent of predator, reflection off ice, something physical enough to solve. That's what I told myself as we drove them toward the south gate under a white noon sun with the ATV whining low and the dogs snapping at heels. At first the lead cows just slowed, then they stopped, not drifted to a pause, stopped as one body, every head lifting toward the open field. Steam rolled from their nostrils, ears fixed forward. The sound that came out of them wasn't the usual complaint of being pushed. It was lower than that. Uncertain, I smelled hot hide, churned dung, and the mineral cold coming off untouched snow. "Let 'em settle," Wade said. "They're crowding the choke point." "Let 'em settle." I swung off the ATV and walked toward the gate. The latch was stiff with rime. Beyond it, the field looked harmless. White ground, fence line, cedar shadows at the far edge. I saw no coyotes, no sagging wire, no ice patch, nothing. One red cow at the front took a backward step, then another. The entire group began backing away from empty space. That got my attention. Cattle don't like to back up. They'll wheel, bunch, push sideways, but backing as a herd means pressure from somewhere they won't face. I felt a little twinge in my chest then, small but real. Still, I opened the gate. "Move them through," I said. Wade didn't. His horse shifted beneath him, restless enough to sidestep. "Clayton." "There's nothing there." He looked at me with an expression that would have been pity if it weren't so tired. "That doesn't mean what you think it means." One of the dogs yelped and tucked tail. The herd shuddered like current had passed through it. I could have stopped then, could have shut the gate and called it wasted time. But I heard challenge in Wade's voice, or maybe I needed to. Pride has a way of translating concern into insult, so I did what I knew worked with stubborn stock. I tightened the pressure, used the ATV and the dogs in my own body position to cut off retreat, turned the bunch until the first animals had no easy option but forward. They fought it. God, they fought it. Their eyes rolled white. A black steer at the rear bawled so hard spit hung in ropes from its mouth. But pressure is pressure. Physics beats nerves often enough that people start mistaking that for mastery. The first cow crossed the line into the south field at a dead run. The rest broke after her. For a few seconds it worked. They streamed through, hooves hammering packed snow, a burst of noise and steam and motion. I remember feeling that grim, stupid pleasure of being proven right. Then every animal in the field swung left together, not toward grass, not toward shelter, toward a patch of open white 30 yards in where nothing at all stood. They pulled up there in a long, trembling arc and would not go another step. You could have laid a rope on the ground at that invisible line. None of them crossed it. I walked forward, anger doing most of my moving by then. A cow nearest me rolled one eye so hard I saw the pink at the corner. She made a sound I had only heard once before when an animal smelled blood after a bad calving, a soft, strained moan like she was trying not to make noise. "Back them out," Wade said behind me. I didn't answer. The field smelled wrong. Not manure, not winter grass, not even the faint sweet rot you get under melting drifts. It smelled like wet concrete in a closed room. Cold. Mineral. Dead and not dead. My skin prickled under my coat. Then the wooden creak came, not from the barn, from somewhere in the field itself. One long complaint, like beams adjusting under strain. Every animal jolted at once. That was enough for me. I backed them out. It took 20 minutes and a lot more force than it should have. Not one of them turned their backs on that empty patch while they retreated. They crabbed sideways, shoved against one another, nearly broke the gate doing it. By the time we got them into the north lot, my gloves were slick with sweat inside and my throat felt lined with metal. Wade said nothing while we latched the gate. Maribel did. She'd come down the lane sometime during the commotion and sat in her truck watching with both hands on the wheel. When I passed close enough, she lowered the window an inch. "Vernon told you not to use that field," she said. "Vernon left a lot of notes. And you chose that one to test." I was too keyed up to answer well. "If there was a sink or a gas pocket or bad footing, you could have said so." She looked over my shoulder at the closed gate. "If it was that simple," she said, "we'd have fixed it." That night the barn started making noise before dark. At first I thought it was the cattle unsettled from the field. Hooves shifting in straw. A gate chain ticking against wood. Normal sounds distorted by the leftovers of a bad day. I was in the kitchen with a legal pad and the estate file open, trying to lose myself in account numbers when a heavy thump rolled through the walls. Then another. Then a scrape. I went to the back door and listened. The sky had gone the flat iron color it gets just after sunset. The yard was blue with cold. I could smell hay and frost and that damp mineral scent stronger now, as if the barn were breathing it out. Something moved inside, not fast, not frantic, deliberate, a shifting mass. Hoof noise, yes, but not only that. There was a drag between sounds, a rough, slow pull like something being drawn over boards. I grabbed my coat from the peg. Wade's truck headlights swung into the drive so abruptly I almost missed the way relief hit me. He was out of the cab before the engine died. "Did you lock it?" he asked. "The barn? Did you lock it before sunset?" I stared at him. "There are animals in there." His face did something then I hadn't seen before. It didn't lose control. Wade seemed too practiced for that. But the set of his mouth changed from irritation to fear so plain it made me cold under the coat. "Clayton," he said, "did you lock it?" "No." He closed his eyes for 1 second. The sound inside the barn stopped, not faded, stopped. We both heard the silence. From overhead, one beam gave off that same old creak, then another. 4 beats apart, breathing. I don't think I moved. I know I didn't speak. Wade walked past me into the mudroom and took the spare barn key from the nail by the door like a man handling something hot. "Stay here." "What the hell is in there?" He didn't answer. He went out into the yard alone, boots crunching the crusted snow, coat snapping once in the cold. I watched from the doorway while he crossed to the barn. He never hurried, which in some ways scared me more than if he'd run. At the threshold, he paused, set one hand on the latch and stood there so long I wondered if he'd lost his nerve. Then he opened the door a crack, slipped inside and closed it behind him. I heard nothing for maybe 10 seconds, then a low voice, too muffled for words. Then another voice, or an echo, I couldn't tell. A heavy impact hit the far wall hard enough to shake snow from the roofline. I took one step into the yard before the cold knifed through my lungs. Wade came back out at once and slammed the door behind him, locking it with both hands. His shoulders were high and rigid like he'd lifted something enormous. "What was that?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "Read the paper." He held the key out. I took it because it was there. His glove brushed mine and I realized his hand was trembling. The next morning he asked, "Did you read them yet?" Same tone, same blank face waiting for my answer. This time I said, "Yes." He nodded once like I'd said no and walked out. That was when I stopped treating him as a superstitious employee and started recognizing him as something more difficult. Wade didn't feel like a fool, he felt like a man working from instructions he hated and obeyed anyway. There was a difference, and once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. I found him behind the machine shed mending a harness trace that didn't need mending. The cold had sharpened every smell on the property: leather oil, diesel, old manure under crusted snow. The barn creaked somewhere behind us, irregular again in daylight, as if the rhythm from the night before had never happened. "I read the damn paper," I said. He kept threading the strap through the buckle. "Did you follow it? It's a list of impossible nonsense. It'd be easier if it was nonsense." I folded my arms against the wind. "Then explain it." "No." That hit me wrong. You don't get to order me around on my own place and then refuse to tell me why. He looked up at that. Really looked. The kind of look that measures not authority but durability. "Your uncle tried explaining once," he said. "To your father. Took 3 hours, lost the light, never made the same mistake again." "My father didn't take the ranch?" "Exactly." The harness leather creaked in his hands. I could smell the tanned hide warming under his gloves. I said, "What's in the south field?" He went back to the buckle. "Don't force the cattle there." "What's in the barn at night?" "Lock it before sunset." I followed those tracks and nothing happened. His hands stopped. "Nothing happened yet." I was getting angry because anger still worked. Anger implied the problem had a scale I understood. "You keep saying things like that, you keep acting like I'm already part of some story everybody but me knows." Wade finished the buckle and set the harness on the rail. Then he asked very quietly, "Did you ever sign your name to something you knew wouldn't hold?" For a second, the whole ranch seemed to go still. Not literally. Wind still hissed low along the shed. A gate chain clicked somewhere. But inside me something locked. I laughed once, too fast. "What kind of question is that?" He didn't react. There it was again, that refusal to take the bait of normal conversation. He wasn't fishing. He was checking alignment on a fact he'd already half suspected. I said, "You read my resume. Is that what this is, some crack about consultants?" "I never saw a resume." "Then what are you talking about?" He looked past me toward the west fence line where I'd repaired that same post twice. "The ranch picks a shape, that's all." "The ranch." He nodded like the word itself was enough. "Your uncle got weather. His father got voices in empty rooms. I got footsteps. That's what it was for me, footsteps where nobody ought to be. You, I guess it found something with more weight on it." I stared at him. Part of me wanted to walk away. Part of me wanted to grab him by the coat and shake a straight answer out of him. Under both of those was something uglier, not belief, recognition trying to rise. Because there was one thing in my life with weight on it, one thing I had spent years tamping down under work and credentials and distance. I didn't tell him that. I told myself he was guessing. It helped for another 2 hours. The west fence failed again just after noon. I was out there with a post driver, jaw tight, determined to solve at least one thing on the ranch by ordinary means. The broken post lay in the snow beside the line like an accusation. I had a steel replacement this time, heavier, deeper set. If frost heave or livestock pressure or hidden rot had anything to say about it, steel would answer. My breath smoked white. The cold tasted metallic enough to make my fillings ache. Every strike of the driver sent a shudder up my arms. I was bent over tightening the clamp when I heard my name. Clayton, behind me, close. The voice was wrong before I knew why it was wrong. Dry, frayed, hurt. I turned immediately. There was a man standing by the drift at the edge of the south field, far enough away that I couldn't make out a face cleanly, near enough that I saw the leg. Left leg dragging at the wrong angle, boot tracing a broken line in the snow. Heavy coat, dark hat, one shoulder lower than the other. He didn't wave, he didn't move closer, he just watched me. The world narrowed so fast I almost dropped the wrench. I remember the sound of blood in my ears and the faint whine of wire under tension where my glove clenched the fence. I remember the smell, cold air and old hay and that wet mineral reek threading through both. Then he spoke again. "You signed off on this." Same voice. No guess, no trick, no resemblance good enough to dismiss. It was the voice of the ranch hand who died in the enclosure collapse outside Torrington 5 years earlier. The one whose injuries I'd read in the report and then buried under cleaner language so the company wouldn't take the full hit. Pelvis crushed, jaw fractured. Left femur shattered high and driven out of line. He'd lived long enough to speak before they put him under. I had told investigators the reinforcement failure couldn't have been predicted from the last inspection. That was the lie my promotion was built on. The figure took one dragging step forward. I backed up so quickly my heel caught the frozen rut behind me. It kept watching. I wish I could tell you I shouted or challenged it or did anything strong enough to match the image I had of myself. What I did was stare and feel old paperwork turning over inside my head. Dates, signatures, load tolerances, photographs from a site file I hadn't opened in years. The dead man's voice in a hospital statement I was never supposed to hear, asking whether the fence had already been reported once before. I had answered that question with a typed no. The figure tilted its head and I saw the side of the face sagged wrong as if one half had set badly after impact. Then Wade was there beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. He took my arm once, hard. "Back to the house," he said. I couldn't stop looking. "That's not possible." "No," he said. "It isn't." We backed away together. Wade never let me turn around, which I noticed and obeyed without thinking. When we reached the yard and I finally looked again, the field edge was empty. No figure, just snow. And a line of tracks leading from the drift toward where I'd stood. My stride. That was the last time I believed there might be a person on the other end of it. Inside the house, my hands shook hard enough I slopped coffee across the table trying to pour it. Wade closed the curtains in the kitchen before speaking. "Now you read them," he said. Not a question. I went to the office and got the folded paper with fingers that barely worked. The handwriting was the same. The rules were the same. But this time there was no room left in me to laugh them off. I read each one slowly, hearing the pieces click into place after the fact. Do not follow any footsteps in the snow that match your stride exactly. I had. If the cattle refuse to enter the south field, do not force them. I had. Lock the barn doors before sunset, even if something is still inside. I had not. If you hear someone call your name from behind you, finish what you are doing before you turn. I had broken that one seconds earlier. If Wade tells you to leave, you are already too late. I looked up from the page. What is this place? Wade stood at the sink, not drinking the coffee he'd poured. Not yours. It was my family's for 80 years. No, he said. Your family got to hold the deed for 80 years. That's different. The house made a soft settling sound in the walls. Outside, a chain struck wood and then stilled. I said, "Start talking." He was quiet a long time, long enough that I thought he might refuse again. When he did speak, his voice had changed, still flat, still controlled, but stripped down, like a man using the last version of a story he trusted. Your great-grandfather took the place after a hard winter and a cheap sale. People said the previous owner left in a hurry. What he left behind was rules. Those got passed down because the ones who didn't pass them down didn't last. The ranch keeps what it needs. Weather, sound, tracks, a voice, a shape. Whatever gets closest to the person trying to stay here. I heard myself ask, trying to stay. Trying to own it, manage it, make it answer to them. That's when it notices you. I looked at the paper again, at Vernon's blunt handwriting biting into the page. And my uncle believed this. Your uncle survived it. The cold in the room seemed to deepen. How? Wade finally took a sip of coffee. His hand was steady now. By learning faster than you. That should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired, bone tired. The kind that settles behind the eyes. I sat down. The chair creaked under me. The paper shook once in my hand and went still. If it takes a shape, I said, then it knows things. It knows the shape. The knowing comes with it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. I stared at the rule about finishing what I was doing before turning. Such a specific instruction, not don't turn, delay, complete the task. As if ritual mattered more than avoidance, as if the ranch cared about the order of obedience. Then I heard myself say, there was an accident. Wade didn't move. I kept my eyes on the page. It was easier. 5 years ago, not on a ranch like this, commercial enclosure, reinforcement failure. I was lead on the safety review after an earlier incident. I found enough to shut it down for a week, maybe longer, enough to cost the owners money, so I wrote it softer than it should have been written. The words came clean after that, cleaner than they deserved. There was a collapse later. A man got trapped in it. He died. The official report said the failure wasn't foreseeable from the inspection data. I signed that too. The house was very quiet. I laughed once under my breath. No humor in it. So that's what it found. Wade set the cup down. Maybe? Or maybe that's what you brought with you. I looked up at him then. Did Vernon know? About your papers? No idea. About the kind of man the ranch would use against itself, maybe. That should have offended me. It did not. Because offense requires room for innocence, and I didn't have much of that left in the kitchen. I asked the question that mattered most and least. Can I leave? Wade considered me with those flat, worn eyes. You can try. It started snowing again before dusk, fine dry needles skimming sideways under a rising wind. By then the ranch had gone from uncanny to procedural in my mind, which I know sounds absurd. But that's what fear does when it finds a competent person. It doesn't always make you scream. Sometimes it makes you build a model, a set of working assumptions, something you can test. The rules were not symbolic, they were operational. Break them and the thing got closer. Follow them and it stayed within certain boundaries. The misaligned fences, the oddly placed gates, the unnecessary reinforcements on the south side, all of it suddenly read differently. Not incompetence, containment. The ranch was built wrong on purpose because right angles and efficient movement weren't the goal. Delay was the goal. Diversion, redirection, buying time.